This time, I did not use the large steel cage traps like before. The terrain in this area was far too difficult. Most of it was deep forest and narrow trails, making it nearly impossible to transport heavy traps into position. More importantly, the wild boars here moved extremely fast and were highly cautious. If they detected unfamiliar metal structures, they could instantly change direction and disappear. So I switched to using net traps. These traps were lighter, faster to deploy, and much easier to camouflage into the surrounding environment. Most importantly, they allowed us to contain an entire sounder within seconds before the animals had time to react and scatter deeper into the forest. The first trap was hidden behind sparse bushes right along the edge of the farm, the exact area where the wild boars regularly emerged to destroy crops before retreating back into the woods. Thanks to the natural cover, the trap blended almost perfectly into the environment, discreet enough to avoid raising suspicion. The trap was left overnight. And by the next morning, even from a distance, I already knew it had worked better than expected. Inside, the number of trapped wild boars was large enough to genuinely surprise me. They crowded together, moving frantically after spending the entire night trapped inside the net enclosure. Without rushing, I kept everything under control and began handling the situation step by step, slowly collecting the entire group before moving on to the location of the next trap. The next trap was placed directly along a forest trail, a familiar route the wild boars frequently used every night. After completing the camouflage and leaving the area, all we could do was wait in silence, hoping the sounder would follow the same path as expected. The following morning, when I returned to inspect the trap, I nearly stopped in place the moment I saw it from afar. Inside, dozens of massive wild boars were packed tightly together, slamming violently against the netting and filling the quiet forest with chaotic noise. The ground surrounding the trap had been completely torn apart, dirt thrown everywhere after hours of desperate attempts to escape. The closer I moved, the more intense the atmosphere became. Several of the largest boars charged aggressively toward the front whenever they noticed movement outside, causing the entire trap to shake violently. With that many animals inside, even a small mistake could send the situation completely out of control. The third trap was set directly along the boundary between the farmland and the forest edge, the mandatory route the wild boars regularly crossed before invading the crops inside the farm. I completed the setup early in the morning, taking advantage of the quiet conditions to avoid making the animals suspicious. But what I did not expect was how quickly the trap would activate. By the afternoon, when I returned to check the area from a distance, I could already tell something was happening. The net trap was shaking violently in the open field, clouds of dust exploding around it, as if something enormous had been caught inside. I immediately moved closer. Numerous wild boars were packed tightly together in the confined space, moving frantically and slamming repeatedly against the netting in search of escape. Several fully grown adults were especially massive, causing the entire structure to shake every time they charged forward. The fourth trap was placed on the western side of the farm, where tall grass formed the perfect hiding area for wild boars after dark. The tracks surrounding the area showed that the sounder had visited repeatedly before, so I was almost certain the trap would work. And exactly as expected, when we returned to inspect it, the entire sounder had already been trapped inside. Chaotic noises echoed through the tall grass as the animals desperately searched for a way out. Without wasting time, we immediately began controlling the situation and collecting the entire group before moving on to the next location. The final trap was set in an open clearing along the southern edge of the pine forest, an area the wild boars regularly crossed before moving deeper into the farmland. Not long after the setup was completed, the trap alert suddenly activated during the night. Knowing the entire sounder could become uncontrollable at any moment, we did not wait until morning. We immediately headed toward the trap location. Even from a distance, chaotic sounds echoed through the silent darkness. As we approached the area, the full result appeared before us. The entire group of wild boars trapped inside after hours of movement throughout the night. Without wasting any time, we quickly began collecting the animals and bringing the entire situation under control before finally leaving the area. When the final trap had been cleared, the atmosphere around the farm finally became quiet again. After hours of constantly moving between trap locations, we had removed far more wild boars than originally expected, reducing the growing threat to the livestock and crops surrounding the farm. But I understood one thing very clearly: this was not the end. Out there, deep within the pine forest surrounding the farmland, fresh tracks continued appearing every single day. That meant other sounders were still moving throughout the area, and sooner or later, we would have to return again. I have witnessed wild boars invading and destroying crops on the farm many times. This has repeated itself season after season. And this time, I wasn't going to let it happen again. I am the farm manager, the one directly responsible for this area. If we can't stop the wild boars, then all the team's effort will be for nothing. So we decided to set traps to put an end to the destruction caused by these feral animals. That night, I set up 2 cage traps in 2 different areas around the farm. One was placed right at the edge of the forest, where footprints and signs of rooting damage frequently appear. The other was set along a narrow trail leading out to the field, a route they often used to forage at night. Everything was carefully prepared, from the bait to the trigger mechanism. After a final check, I left and relied entirely on the surveillance camera in the darkness. The next morning, the first thing I did was review the footage. What I saw surprised me. At the first trap, around midnight, 3 adult wild boars appeared. They moved very cautiously, constantly sniffing around the cage. After a few minutes of inspecting, one of them stepped inside to eat the bait. The moment it moved deep enough in, the door slammed shut instantly. The other 2 panicked and immediately ran back into the forest. Switching to the second trap, things happened much faster. Only 1 boar appeared, but it seemed far less cautious. Almost immediately, it walked straight into the cage, and the trap snapped shut within seconds. No hesitation, no chance to escape. After watching the entire recording, I immediately gathered my tools and got into the pickup truck to check the site. As I approached, I could already hear loud banging coming from inside the trap. The boar in the first cage was still very strong, repeatedly ramming into the metal bars, trying to break free. It was larger than I had expected, and clearly, handling it would not be simple. I approached carefully, keeping a safe distance before securing the cage to prevent it from tipping over or being damaged. Once everything was stabilized, I moved to the second trap. The boar there was just as aggressive, but the tighter space made it harder for it to move compared to the first one. The next step was loading both cages onto the truck. This was the most time-consuming and physically demanding part. With the heavy weight of the boars and the steel cages, I had to use ropes and even the truck's power to pull them up onto the bed. Every move had to be calculated carefully. One small mistake could lead to injury or a broken trap. After securing both cages firmly on the truck, I quickly left the area and returned to the farm. After dealing with the 2 traps from the previous night, I didn't stop. Signs of wild boars were still present around the area, especially in the orchard behind the farm and a low-lying patch not far from there. This time, I decided to set 2 more traps, but during the daytime when they would be less suspicious. The first trap was placed right in the fruit orchard. This is where wild boars often come to dig and destroy, especially when the fruit begins to ripen. The second trap was a completely different situation. I brought it to a low-lying area where water collects, creating a muddy, damp terrain. This is a place wild boars frequently visit to find water and cool themselves. By late afternoon, everything was ready. I left and waited for the results. Clearly, the number of wild boars in this area is not small, and what I had just seen was only part of the problem. We are a rapid response wildlife control team operating in the state of Texas. The uninvited guests only show up after the sun goes down. They move in groups, tearing up underground irrigation systems and ripping through topsoil in search of roots. Yes, feral hogs. The ranch owner had tried everything, but these animals are too smart. They learn fast, they adapt, and they always find the weak point. That's when we get called in. First rule, shut down all current deterrents. No noise, no small cage traps, no hunting dogs. We need the sounder to believe this place is no longer a threat. The first location sits deep in the woods. Dense grass, limited visibility. At 7:22 p.m., the camera pings. The automatic feeder has done its job. A group moves in. I watch through the live feed. No other wildlife. No stray livestock. This is it. The gate drops fast. So fast they don't even realize they're trapped until it's already over. Then comes the chaos. Panic erupts inside the trap. Bodies collide. Steel echoes through the forest. For a brief moment, the entire area feels like it's shaking. And then, control. The second site is wide and open. Bait is concentrated at the center. At exactly 7:37 p.m., the second group arrives. This time, I have to be more careful. Open terrain means higher risk. If anyone or any vehicle passes through, I must delay the drop. But the area stays clear. Not a second wasted. I trigger the system remotely. Two 12-foot gates slam down in perfect sync. But the third location, that's the real test. A large sounder. They circle for a long time. The smaller ones enter first. The bigger ones stay out, watching, calculating. I stay locked in my seat, eyes fixed on the phone screen. Not a second away. My heartbeat rises. Breathing tightens. It takes until 2 a.m. Patience pays off. The entire group is finally inside, feeding under the soft glow of infrared. I send the command. The gates drop. Instant chaos. The sheer number of animals makes the steel enclosure shake violently in the night. But once the lock engages, not a single one gets out. What looks like a clean result in one night isn't luck. It's a complete shift in strategy. Phase 1 is always scouting and setup. We identify travel routes, habitual paths, and place monitoring stations discreetly. Once locations are confirmed, it's time to choose the trap. We don't do things the old way anymore. Too slow, too costly, too risky. We use modern modular corral systems. With this setup, one person can deploy rigid panels, lock them in place, and raise a 12-foot heavy-duty drop gate using a manual winch. All in under 20 minutes. The key is speed. The gate drops instantly. The goal isn't just to catch some, it's to contain all. Once the structure is up, we install the system. One automatic feeder inside, one solar-powered ice camera mounted high from that moment on. Everything runs remotely, 24/7 through a smartphone. Anywhere, anytime. When a camera confirms the entire sounder is inside, one tap sends a signal. The gate drops immediately, and if a person or livestock enters the area, we delay. No panic, no risk. Everything is controlled down to the second. Wildlife control isn't about force or luck. It's about strategy, technology, and understanding animal behavior. With remote systems and real-time monitoring, we remove unnecessary human interference, ensure maximum safety for the surrounding environment, and solve the problem at its root. When wolves and mountain lions disappear, which species rises to dominate the forests and valleys of Arizona? The answer is wild boars. They push deeper into residential areas, leaving heavy destruction with every step and becoming a direct threat to human safety. This morning's emergency call from a bean farm marked the starting point of this latest control operation. Without wasting a second, we quickly loaded our gear into the pickup truck and hit the gas straight toward the area, calling for help. The damage was exposed right at the edge of the field. A wild boar was trapped inside the agricultural fencing net. Even with its leg tightly pinned and no way to retreat, the animal showed no sign of panic. Instead, it became extremely aggressive, charging wildly and trying to attack anyone who dared step too close. Ordinary farm fencing was never designed to withstand the raw power of an animal like this. Clearly, the farmer's passive barrier method had completely failed. To eliminate this threat for good, we had no choice but to intervene with a professional trapping system. Following the freshly torn up soil from the bean field leading straight into the open spaces near the forest edge, we quickly identified the herd's main travel route. The trap network was immediately set up based on their feeding habits. The next morning, the sky cleared and sunlight broke through. My heartbeat picked up as I walked closer to the forest edge to check the results from the night before. Inside the first one-way drop gate trap stood a massive boar, nearly 5 feet long, weighing close to 330 pounds, and estimated to be around 6 to 7 years old. The bristles along its back stood up like a warning the moment it saw us. We kept waiting until nightfall. Silence swallowed everything around us. At the exact same trap location from that morning, the scent strategy had worked perfectly, catching the smell of their own kind and the bait. The wild boars slowly moved into the area. One by one, they slipped through the angled one-way drop gate of the steel trap. The mechanism was simple, but brutally effective. Once the gate dropped, every push they made only forced the edge deeper into the ground. No gap, no escape. The moment they realized they were trapped, the entire group exploded into chaos. Heavy muscle slammed violently against steel, creating a brutal chain of metallic crashes. But the reinforced steel frame held firm, and the outcome was sealed within minutes. But we weren't done yet. Holding our breath, we shifted our focus to another trap location. A lone dark figure slowly approached. It confidently stepped all the way inside and began feeding calmly, completely unaware of the deadly mechanism hidden beneath its feet. Just one light touch. The vertical steel door dropped. The sharp metallic slam echoed through the night. Startled, the animal jumped back and rammed hard against the cage wall. It spun violently, growling with rage inside the tight steel space. But the mechanical lock had already snapped shut. There would be no second chance. While we were still watching that animal, The monitoring system signaled another promising alert from a nearby area. At the second one-way drop gate trap, another one had already been caught. Spreading multiple traps along the predicted travel routes that night helped us completely shut down the herd's destruction. As the first light of dawn appeared, it was time for the final and most dangerous part of the operation, safely removing these wild animals from the area. I carefully backed the truck right up to the trap entrance. Using heavy-duty ratchet straps and thick ropes, we tightly secured the transport cage to the trap gate. Moving the boars required extreme patience. The use of electric prodding equipment had to be calculated with absolute precision. At the right moment, one light touch would create enough momentum for the animal to leap forward into the transport cage. At the wrong moment, it would spin back and charge straight into the steel barrier, separating it from the handler. Every movement had to be decisive. No rushing, no hesitation. The entire destructive sounder was successfully removed. The farm stayed peaceful for a while. But silence is never permanent with animals like these. When the cold winds arrive and the ground is covered with dry autumn leaves, we know food becomes scarce, and that scarcity will force them back. But whenever they return, our system will be ready. Catching wild boars has never been about luck. It is detailed calculation, from wind direction to scent control. We will continue holding the line in these forests to keep the area safe. More than 150 pounds of rippling muscle, razor-sharp tusks, and a breeding speed far beyond control. We are slowly losing ground to wild boars if we keep relying on traditional trapping methods. As wildlife control managers in Texas, we bring a new control tool here. Soft, but impossible to break. But to capture an entire group of intelligent wild boars, old steel cages are no longer enough. We need a smarter strategy, a soft net trapping system called Pig Brig. The whole team moved immediately. Everyone had their role, working in perfect coordination. The heavy hammer strikes drove 7-foot steel stakes deep into the hard ground. The Pig Brig net was carefully suspended. Fermented corn bait was spread evenly from the outside toward the center. Sweat soaked through our protective clothing, but a perfect trap was finally ready. At a trap site near the forest edge, a large herd of boars had appeared. They were eagerly feeding on the fermented corn bait inside the net, completely unaware that they were already trapped. Outside, a few scout boars still stood back in the darkness, alert, watching, testing. They absolutely refused to step inside. The next morning, we drove to the site to inspect the overnight catch. Everything inside the trap became tense immediately. Every boar panicked and ran wildly the moment they saw human figures approaching. A full herd of wild boars of every size. Big ones, small ones. They charged continuously at the net walls. But it was useless. The pig brig net absorbed every impact. With no hard surface to push against, they quickly exhausted themselves, and everything was brought under control. The net trap had done its job perfectly, but the wild boars were still out there, and we could not allow ourselves to become careless. Noticing that the herd had started changing its travel route, I decided to establish a new trap point in an open grassy area between the forest and the farmland. During the first few days, we rolled the lower edge of the net upward. Bait was spread from the outside inward. This was the familiarization stage, allowing them to move freely in and out. When the camera reported back, an 80-pound scout boar stepped forward first. It sniffed around the net, carefully feeding outside the trap. The others stood farther away, watching. But eventually, the temptation of food won. Later, they finally pushed their snouts forward and slipped completely inside the net. The trap quietly closed without a single sound. Their survival instinct had been deceived by a design that felt too natural. The next morning, bright sunlight filled the sky. We approached the open field. The harsh sunlight made me squint, my chest pounding at the scene in front of me. Once again, chaos. A large herd of boars was desperately trying to escape. One huge boar, weighing no less than 120 pounds, pushed its front legs upward, trying to climb over the 7-foot net wall. Dust flew everywhere. They slammed continuously into the net walls. The entire area looked like it had been torn apart by pure panic. The following night, the clock showed nearly 9 p.m. The herd arrived. They pushed their snouts onto the net close to the ground, fighting each other to get inside and reach the bait, only to become trapped almost immediately. The principle of the trap is one way: easy to enter, impossible to leave. But suddenly, my heartbeat sped up. I cursed quietly under my breath. One boar entering had accidentally exposed a small opening, and another immediately slipped backward and escaped. It happened in an instant. Nature always finds a way to punish the smallest mistakes, forcing us to be even more careful with every detail of the setup. The hardest mission waited at the final trap point. Last year, this entire area had been completely destroyed by wild boars. Not even a blade of grass remained. We patiently waited several more days for the boars to grow familiar with the presence of the net. When we finally saw signs that they had started entering the trap to feed, I lowered the net, but intentionally left a tiny part of the entrance slightly open. A psychological trap designed to lure the most stubborn ones deeper inside. The result finally came. After a long period of monitoring, we successfully captured a massive male boar weighing around 140 pounds. And when dawn arrived, my breathing grew heavier with every step forward. Inside the net, the giant male boar and its herd were crowded together in complete chaos, desperately trying to break free. They slammed into every corner, turned in circles, bit wildly at everything around them. The entire steel stake system shook violently under the force of their power. But every escape attempt became hopeless. The confinement had been established completely. Controlling wild boars is not about fighting muscle with muscle. It is a game of patience, reading tracks, and understanding animal behavior. When that knowledge is combined with smart tools, we do not just protect the farmer's property. We complete the mission safely, professionally and responsibly. That sound always begins in the middle of the night. The crack of dry branches snapping apart. The sound of roots being violently torn from the ground again and again. And the sharp snap of barbed wire fences breaking under the force of wild boars. The farmer can only listen helplessly as thousands of dollars vanish into the darkness. The moment we received the report, we, the rapid response specialists from the Texas Wildlife Management Agency, set out immediately. In the back of the truck was the game changer trapping system. Without wasting any time, the whole team immediately began checking every footprint and every patch of torn up soil to trace the movement of the herd. The first trap location was a narrow, dry creek bed where the tight terrain made a small modular trap the only possible option. The signal flashed. Through the infrared camera, the entire herd had entered the trap, completely absorbed in eating the bait. After one deep, controlled breath, my finger pressed the trigger without hesitation, and the heavy steel gate slammed shut, tearing through the silence of the night. Not stopping at the first result, we continued checking the system and quickly shifted to the next target. The herd had already entered, but a few large males still hesitated outside, snorting and sensing something unusual in the wind. Waiting meant the boars inside would finish eating and leave, but acting immediately would allow the ones outside to escape. There was no perfect choice. I tightened my hand and decisively pressed the drop trap command. The gate slammed shut instantly. The boars outside vanished into the darkness in panic within seconds, while inside the cage, chaos erupted violently. Heavy bodies crashed wildly in every direction, slamming into the steel frame like waves hitting rock. The third trap point, deep inside the forest, had movement. The exhaustion disappeared instantly. This area was completely different because the wild boars here reacted with extreme aggression when cornered, forcing us to deploy a large circular trap. No sharp corners, no pressure points. The camera screen lit up, clearly showing a large herd gathering beneath the feeder, each one stepping inside without the slightest suspicion. The decisive moment had arrived. Both drop gates were triggered at the same time. The boars froze for a split second before their wild instincts took over. They ran in circles, colliding and crushing against each other, creating a sound of hooves mixed with violently shaking metal. Near the orchard, the boars here were extremely intelligent. They feared narrow entrances. Traditional drop gates became useless. The best solution this time was 2 fully suspended cage traps. No doors, no walls, no visible danger. The herd slowly moved in, cautious and suspicious, finding nothing unusual. The moment the last sow crossed the line, the drop command was confirmed. The entire heavy steel frame dropped freely to the ground. The boars jumped in terror, crashing wildly into everything in complete panic. But the solid steel structure held them in place. The gamble was over, and this time, we won completely. But did you know, behind every successful trap closure is an entire system calculated down to the smallest detail. We use flexible steel modules. Steel mesh is locked together with quick pins and anchor stakes are driven several feet deep to withstand the force of hundreds of pounds of impact. During the first days, bait is scattered everywhere, so the herd loses suspicion. On the decisive night, the bait is placed only in the farthest corner inside the trap, forcing them to push their entire bodies into the fully secured zone. Only when technology and psychology work together perfectly can we reclaim peace for the fields. The moment we arrived at the site and stood beside the steel mesh, we could truly see how terrifying they were. Massive blocks of muscle, skin thick like armor. They carried diseases that threatened both livestock and native wildlife. Without allowing the herd's panic to continue any longer, we immediately carried out the final step of the process. Every handling procedure was done right there from outside the trap. No unnecessary, prolonged panic.
Yep, it's totally slick. Yep. You hear him in there?
Every wild boar captured is not simply another number on a report. It means fields saved, irrigation systems no longer destroyed, and an entire ecosystem protected from silent devastation. If you want to witness more fast-paced and intense control operations like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next video. I once thought everything was over after the previous time setting traps, but I couldn't have imagined that very night the wild boars would return in even greater numbers. A frightening thought crossed my mind. They had come back to take revenge for their own kind. But no matter what, if I didn't act immediately with this level of destruction, the entire farm would be wiped out in just a few nights. I would set traps and take them all down. I didn't have much time. If this herd had returned for revenge, they would come back again. And next time, it could be even worse. I began scanning the entire area around the farm, trails, fresh footprints, patches of ground that had just been torn up. Just by looking, I could already determine their paths and habits. And if I wanted to stop them, I had to stay one step ahead. I carried all my equipment and moved to each position I had identified beforehand. At the western forest edge, I set up the first trap right along the trail. Fresh footprints were still clearly visible in the soil. I didn't waste time, secured the trap frame, checked the trigger mechanism, then began spreading bait. The scent of food spread quickly through the damp night air. That night, we continued installing more traps scattered around the area. Once everything was done, we left, returning the silence for the boars to come. The next morning, we came back. As I approached the first trap, I froze. Inside the cage was a group of wild boars crammed together, panicking, constantly slamming into the metal bars. And that was only the first one. But the second trap, everything went far beyond what I had imagined. The moment we got closer, the crashing sounds came in rapid bursts. The boars inside reacted far more violently. They weren't just panicking, they were almost going mad. Each powerful impact slammed against the iron frame, making the entire cage shake violently. At times, it felt like it could burst open at any moment. The larger one stood in front, repeatedly charging at the trapdoor as if trying to break it. Behind them, others pushed and trampled over each other, forming a chaotic, uncontrollable mass. The tension in the air rose instantly. We had to keep our distance. The third trap was what truly made me stop in my tracks. From quite a distance, I could already hear the noise. No longer just scattered impacts, but a continuous, heavy, chaotic sound, as if something was trying to break free at all costs. As I got closer, I could hardly believe my eyes. Inside the cage was a number of wild boars so large that it was completely packed. They were pressed tightly against one another, filling every corner, leaving no space at all. The ones near the front kept slamming into the metal frame, while those behind were forced upward, creating immense pressure on the entire trap. At the fourth trap, everything suddenly became quieter. There were no violent impacts, no chaotic noise like the previous traps. Inside the cage were adult boars, not overly large, but still strong enough to be dangerous if handled carelessly. The final trap surprised me in a different way. As I approached, I realized there were almost no adults inside. All of them were young wild boars, smaller in size, faster in movement, constantly squeezing against one another in the confined space. They weren't big enough to deliver the powerful blows of adults, but they were far from harmless. On the contrary, they were the biggest problem because all of them were future threats to my farm. After checking all the traps, I stood still and looked over the entire area. The number of wild boars caught was greater than ever before, from aggressive adults to young ones that hadn't even grown yet. Each trap revealed a different problem, and after everything I'd seen, I knew this would not be the last time. No one on our team thought things would escalate this far. At first, it was just scattered tracks, a small patch of land torn up, a few half-eaten fruits. But within weeks, Those marks connected, forming trails, then clear pathways. And that meant one thing. Not just one, but multiple sounders of feral hogs had chosen this place as a feeding ground. If we didn't stop it quickly, it wouldn't just be one crop lost. The farmers could lose the entire season. That afternoon, the traps went in. Not just one location, but multiple points cutting across the hogs' movement routes. And when night fell, everything began. We didn't have to wait long. About 15 minutes after setup, the first group appeared. They moved slowly, big ones, small ones, staying close together, calm, unhurried, like they knew this land by heart. The bait drew them in, heads down, feeding, until bang, the gate dropped. The sound shattered the silence of the night, followed instantly by chaos inside the enclosure. Bodies slamming, circles of panic. That first moment had all of us holding our breath. Before things could even settle, while the pounding of hooves and metal still echoed, another trap, just a short distance away. Slam, a second capture, and this time bigger, heavier, a larger group. When confined, they didn't just ram, they pushed together. The steel frame shook, flexed, then snapped back. This is the difference between catching individuals and catching a full group. With enough numbers, the force multiplies. And if your system isn't strong enough, you lose everything. We kept waiting because we knew the night wasn't over. Right on cue, the thermal camera to the north picked up another group already inside a trap. But look closely, one mature hog stayed outside, watching, smelling, calculating. In cases like this, waiting for a single cautious animal can cost time, and worse, trigger suspicion in the group. We made the call, dropped the gate, click. The ones inside were secured. The outsider escaped. But remember this, no trapping system is ever 100% perfect. The next evening, we were back on watch, because they always return. Around 9:16 p.m., another group. Mixed sizes, more cautious this time, stopping, smelling the ground. A typical response after partial capture. Suspicion, but not enough to stay away. And then, the moment they let their guard down. Feeding, relaxed, bang. First group of the night, secured. Less than an hour later, another group approached a trap at the forest edge. But this time, something was different. They weren't uniform. Different coat colors, different sizes. This meant multiple smaller groups had merged. And that's the most dangerous scenario, because there's no shared rhythm. Each animal reacts differently. Timing becomes everything. We waited, watched, and then pressed the trigger. The gate dropped. Instant chaos. They charged the steel walls with full force. All that pressure hitting the structure at once. If the frame failed, we don't even want to imagine what would happen next. Almost simultaneously, another trap triggered nearby. This time, we moved in immediately. Flashlights cut through the dark. Inside, the animals surged, running in circles, changing direction, slamming into corners and bouncing back. This wasn't random panic. It was instinct searching for a weak point. That's why we check at night. Not for the count, but for control. The next morning, we made another round. Some traps still held additional animals. They were exhausted, still running, still pushing. But the aggression had faded. Fatigue had taken over. One, By midday, transport began. Quick, but controlled. Each latch checked again. Each enclosure secured. Then one by one, the traps were moved out of the fields. Clean, efficient, by the book. That marked the end of a multi-day operation to stop crop destruction. For us, this isn't hunting. It's an ongoing battle. Every night, the animals adapt. And if we don't adapt with them, one small mistake is enough to undo everything.
Hip, hip. Hip, 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 hip. Shut it. God dang.
2 days ago, the wild boar sweep was more successful than expected. The number of boars captured reached into the hundreds. But it didn't end there. The lead boars, cunning, alert, and incredibly sly, were still able to evade capture in almost unbelievable ways. I knew I had to use a different approach to catch them. A series of traps had to be set. The first trap was placed right at the edge of the forest where I knew it would pass. As night fell, the lead boar appeared alone, moving very slowly, constantly stopping to sniff and observe with extreme caution. It stepped forward, then backed away several times, making me think it would leave. But in a single moment of lowered guard, it moved deep inside. The trapdoor slammed shut decisively. Instantly, it reacted violently, repeatedly ramming into the metal bars, making the cage shake intensely. The next trap worked exactly as expected. 2 wild boars appeared, moving slowly and cautiously. They kept stopping to sniff, but in the end, the bait still drew them inside. The moment both stepped deep enough, the trapdoor snapped shut. Immediately, they reacted violently, moving constantly inside the cage, ramming in multiple directions to find a way out. But this time, the trap held firm. Both were captured. The next morning, I returned to check each trap. From a distance, I could already hear constant noise coming from them. As I got closer, the boars inside immediately reacted, moving and slamming into the metal bars. I kept my distance, quickly observing the situation before handling each trap one by one. The next trap surprised me. When I checked, it was completely packed with wild boars. Not just one or two, but an entire group caught at once. They were crammed together, moving chaotically and constantly hitting the metal frame, creating a scene completely different from the previous traps. Another trap on the western edge of the forest had also been triggered, but this time only one boar was caught. As we approached, it immediately reacted strongly, constantly moving inside the cage and ramming into the metal bars. The confined space made it even more aggressive, trying every possible way to escape, but the trap held firm. The final trap was deep inside a barren part of the forest, where I didn't expect so much activity. But as I got closer, I was truly surprised. Inside were massive wild boars packed tightly together, making the trap so crowded that there was almost no space left. They moved heavily, constantly striking the metal frame, creating the feeling that the cage could be under extreme pressure at any moment.
Make a loop.
After checking all the traps, I finally let out a sigh of relief. At least the most dangerous wild boars have been brought under control. The surrounding area gradually returned to quiet, and for the first time in many days, I felt that things were temporarily under control.